Everyone's heard of .NET. Some developers swear by it, massive companies rely on it, and Microsoft has spent over 2 decades turning it into one of the most powerful development platforms in the world. But at the same time, a lot of newer developers avoid it completely. So what actually is .NET? Why is it so popular in enterprise software? And why does it still struggle with adoption today? Let's break it down. At its core, .NET is a free, open source developer platform created by Microsoft. It's mainly used with C# and lets you build pretty much anything. APIs, websites, desktop apps, mobile apps, cloud services, even games. And one of the reasons it became so popular is because Microsoft basically built an entire ecosystem around it. But .NET today looks very different to how it originally started. Back in 2002, Microsoft released something called the .NET Framework. The problem was, it only really worked properly on Windows. So for years, .NET had this reputation of being very corporate, very Microsoft, and very tied to Windows servers. Then Microsoft did something nobody really expected at the time. They rebuilt large parts of the platform into something called .NET Core. This version was faster, modular, open source, and most importantly, cross-platform, meaning developers could now run .NET applications on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and eventually Microsoft unified everything together and dropped the core branding entirely. So now it's all just called .NET, and honestly, the shift completely changed the perception of the platform. Because modern .NET is actually ridiculously capable. Performance-wise, it's generally one of the fastest mainstream frameworks out there, especially with ASP.NET Core. Microsoft has spent years optimizing memory usage, async processing, web server performance, and its runtime efficiency, to the point where .NET regularly competes with and sometimes even beats frameworks written in languages people usually associate with speed. And that surprises a lot of developers, because people often assume Microsoft framework equals slow enterprise software, but modern .NET is nothing like old school .NET framework. Now naturally, when developers hear fast framework, the next question becomes, why isn't everyone using it? And honestly, a lot of it comes down to perception and complexity, because although .NET is powerful, it can feel overwhelming when you're new to it. With something like Node.js or Python, you can usually get started very quickly. You install it, you write a file, and you run it. But with .NET, beginners suddenly run into concepts like dependency injection, middleware, services, lifetimes, configuration providers, hosting builders, and if you're brand new to programming, that can feel like being hit by a truck of architectural patterns before you've even built anything. The weird thing is, those same features are also why large companies love it, because .NET is built for scalability from the beginning. A good example of this is dependency injection. Now, dependency injection sounds terrifying when you first hear it, but the basic idea is actually simple. Instead of your classes manually creating everything they need, .NET can automatically provide those dependencies for you. And unlike a lot of other frameworks, dependency injection is built directly into .NET itself. So things like logging, database services, authentication, configuration, all integrate into the same system out of the box, which is amazing for large applications. But again, it adds more concepts beginners need to learn early on. Microsoft definitely realised this problem over the years, because newer versions of C# and .NET have clearly been moving towards simplicity. A really good example is modern C# syntax. Years ago, even a basic Hello World app looked something like this. Now you can literally just write one line. That's it, no program class, no main method, no boilerplate, which makes the language feel much less intimidating for newer developers. And you can see the exact same shift happening with APIs too. Traditionally, ASP.NET applications use full MVC controllers, which worked great, but came with a lot of structure and boilerplate. Then APIs became more lightweight, microservices became popular, and developers wanted faster ways to build endpoints. So Microsoft introduced minimal APIs, meaning you can now build an API endpoint with something as simple as this. And honestly, this was a huge move for adoption, because it made .NET feel modern and lightweight instead of overly enterprise focused. However, despite all these improvements, .NET still has downsides. One of the biggest is startup performance, because .NET traditionally used something called JIT compilation, or just-in-time compilation, which basically means part of your code are compiled while the application is running. That gives .NET a lot of flexibility and optimization opportunities, but it also means applications can have slower cold starts compared to something like Go. This becomes especially noticeable in containers, serverless functions, and microservices, where startup speed matters a lot. So once again, Microsoft tried solving the problem, and that's where AOT comes in. Ahead of time compilation allows .NET applications to be compiled into native code before they are run, which can massively improve startup time, memory usage, and container performance. And it's a really important direction for the future of the platform, because modern backend infrastructure increasingly depends on lightweight, fast starting services. So that's it. That's probably the best way to describe modern .NET overall. It's a platform that spent years being known as this heavy Windows enterprise framework, but has slowly transformed into something much faster, cleaner, and more developer friendly. It's open source, cross-platform, ridiculously optimized, and is backed by one of the biggest software companies on earth. At the same time though, it still carries some of that old reputation. And compared to beginner-friendly ecosystems like Node.js or FastAPI, .NET can feel more complex than it probably needs to. But if you can get past that learning curve, you end up with an ecosystem that's incredibly powerful, which is exactly why banks, governments, SaaS companies, and massive enterprises still rely on it every single day. And the truth? The modern version of .NET is probably far better than most developers realise. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.